Hello, welcome to the final demo of my capstone project, NorthBridge Analytics Platform. This is a platform built for data analysts at the company NorthBridge Financial. This is a company created for this project, so they don't exist in real life, but they do have realistic use cases. We'll get into more of those specifics once we get to the actual site, but for now we'll just log in using this demo button, giving us view-only access to the site. I'll go through some of the main features of the landing page here. At the top, we have the KPI strip giving us an overview of the kind of data that is in the database. So we can see that there is $13 billion in revenue being tracked over 12 companies. Very impressive clients they have. If we go down here to this graph, it's a dashboard implemented using Apache Superset. So the data is coming from the backend, but Apache Superset is basically helping us to present it in a nice manner. I'll go through some of the features that Superset allows us to do, because right now this graph, for example, is showing us how the transactions are coming in on, I believe, a weekly grain, but maybe we want to know what was it like on a month-to-month basis over the whole time we've been tracking our clients, all the clients being all aggregated into this chart. So now it's showing us on a month-to-month basis, April to June, July, they're very nice. Just showing us over the whole time that it's been active. So another nice thing is this allows us to zoom in on a more specific time. We can shorten it, we can drag it across like that. It's very interactive, and I like Superset a lot for these kind of features, so I was really glad how it worked out and glad I decided to use it for the project. Now, a little more regarding the structure of this main dashboard is meant to reflect kind of this structure here on the left, so just giving a quicker snapshot of what's going on. Maybe you want to check how the transactions are made up in regards to which currency the transactions are in. And that might inform the user. I think I want to go here into the Forex rates and conversions tab and see a little bit more information about that. Now, the last part of the landing page I'll point out here is the quarantine log. So something I haven't mentioned yet is data quality is a very, very big focus of this platform. Now, since we have these very, very big clients who have lots and lots of revenue, they do not want to be making mistakes. So even small issues with the data could propagate through the math the analysts are doing and cause bigger issues downstream. So that's why we have this shown up here at the get-go. But we will get to that later. I'll just go through these kind of in order. Like I said, this here at the end, data quality is kind of the more important part, but we'll just go through some of the features I've built out in each dashboard. So you can see like this whole thing kind of loads in. That's a dashboard I will have built in Superset and then embedded into the front end. So it's not every page is made up of just the dashboard, but for some of them it was just a better way to do it. I probably won't go through every single chart, but I'll just point out some of the similarities and how the dashboards are set up. We can apply filters. If we wanted to just look at like one company, for example, we could filter it that way. And then, of course, I would assume this chart will just show one line. Yeah, so we filtered it down to one company, and it's only showing us this. And similar to this chart, we've kind of filtered it down to one company. And it is also kind of breaking it up by currency here, which is nice, and fiscal quarter just for the most recent year. Now we'll move on a little bit to the company view. This in my opinion, is one of the more helpful dashboards. Um, Now, again, I actually haven't mentioned this yet, but I did create all the data myself. So there were points where I had to kind of cut out some data that would exist more from real life. So I decided to make my own data just to have a little bit more control of what was going in and to also make it a little easier to create this data quality stuff. Um, if I could mess it up, the data, add noise in a way that was a little more controlled, then I could track the performance of how well I was then cleaning it a little bit better. So some of the data quality processing is a bit of a proof of concept thing. It doesn't integrate everything from real life, but enough that um, a lot of what I learned here can be transferred to a real life scenario. So if we're looking more at the companies in specific, see the filter is kind of defaulted just alphabetically to this company here. Um, I think this is probably one of the more helpful graphs actually that I've tucked away down here, showing the company revenue versus the industry average. So we can see here, oh look, Wednesday, November 19th, uh, this company, Alpenmart, uh, GmbH, they did really well on this day compared to the industry. Um, and here we're looking at expenses for the company. Um, it spikes a little bit here because I have a cron job kind of uh, ingesting lots and lots of data since I created this platform. So, you'll see some graphs where it tends to spike here at the end a little bit and be more consistent because this was a historical seed all the way back to 2021 just to get some data in there initially. And it's a little bit of an overwhelming chart at first, but that's why we have this um, zoomable thing. And when it's vertical, you can use the scroll wheel or you can just drag it. But we can see that they, in April of 2025, spent a lot on payroll. And then I guess they did some cuts to the payroll. Oh no. and we're able to save a little bit more money on that. Um, and maybe they spent more on utilities because they replaced their workers with AI. So that's just some examples of some fun insights you can get from these graphs I've made. Obviously, I would like to see a little bit more in detail because now we're just speculating about why those expenses changed. But um, if you were working with a real company's data, you would be able to drill down a lot more in depth into the kind of spending they were doing. And here, of course, we just have a basic revenue trend. Moving on to the industry benchmarks. This is going to give you just a better idea of the industry as a whole. So some good feedback I got from business students was that a company advising their clients in the context I already described is they might want to be looking for opportunities for their clients to expand within their industry or to adjacent industries or maybe industries in a different region, like the same industry in a different region, right? So that's why I created this view to just give a bit of a better look at those kind of things. Um, and so these graphs get a little bit more complicated. Um, sorry, my scroll wheel is a little broken, so that's why that gets a little weird. We'll go past this table at the top. That's a pretty basic structure. I decided to keep consistent throughout a lot of the dashboards. Let's just have the table at the top, and then um, you get to go down here for a little bit more of an interesting visual. So I put all these three graphs next to each other vertically. I thought it was also just a nice way to look at it. Again, we have that zoom here, especially useful for this graph because of just the time grain that it's looking at. But um, we might want to change that here to just quarter, because I think those lines are going a little crazy. Then it reloads just that one graph. Nice, that's a little bit easier to understand. But I think we can move on to the Forex rate and conversions page. When I initially started this project, this was kind of the main focus of the project, where I wanted to have live updates to some of the data. So some of these values you can see here or in this ticker, they should be updating every 5 seconds. There you can see it just happened. Basically, what I wanted to show is different ways for data to be ingested and processed and then presented. Because some of these graphs here, it takes a lot more aggregating, and it needs to be stored in analytics ready database tables, right? But if we're going to be displaying new information every 5 seconds, we do want to store it differently. So that was part of the schema, which you should be able to see in the GitHub repo that this video is attached to, or it maybe is linked in the description of this video if you found the video first before the GitHub repo. But anyway, um, the rest of this is pretty simple. I just built in like a currency converter tool just for fun. Obviously, US dollars to US dollars is not going to show you anything interesting, but it does assume that, the user, since NorthBridge Financial is based in the US, just would always want to convert things back to US dollars. So it kind of just has that defaulted in. So we're converting between Canadian dollars and US dollars there. Some of these charts are also, they're pretty simple in the way they just break up some of the currencies and companies, things like that. So let's just move on to the data quality here. This part, like I mentioned, is the more practical side of the platform, and to take a little bit longer to load than usual. You might have also noticed that these values took a second to load in. It is different than here, the main dashboard. These load super, super quickly. You can't even see them loading. But they do use the same function, which is fast API. I've just put some more complicated queries backing these ones, which is why they take a little bit longer, but it is helpful for demo purposes to show that it is actually loading straight from the database, from the back end. But it's just much, much faster than when you go through Superset, which of course is still having a hard time here. It does give you those really nice charts, but at the cost of being a lot heavier and taking longer to come through. So while we wait on that, I guess I will. So while we wait on that to load, I will talk a little bit about. Okay. So now that that has started loading a little bit, there we go. The KPI strip up here at the top, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. It just gives you an overview of what's going on. The pass rate here, this is how much data is clean in the database. I do have some other metrics from a primary analysis of the pipeline. A good amount of the data initially has something wrong with it, right? So I think it was roughly like a third of the data um, was messed up in some way, one way or another. And I did have a predefined standardization pipeline to actually clean a lot of those. And so that's how we end up with almost all the data being clean. But some of it is so messed up that um, we can't know for sure what it was supposed to be. So that's what ends up in quarantine. for a user to manually sort through. Now I did, I'll tell on myself here a little bit, I did kind of engineer that to make, I did kind of engineer that so I did kind of engineer the process so we would end up with just a few thousand quarantine rows. That is, for example, purposes where a user cannot really realistically go through all of those themselves and decide what to do with them. But it's also not so big that it makes it look like this website sucks. Because ultimately 99.78% of the data being good is quite a good passing rate, and 100% of this percentage is correct data, right? This value is just kind of saying from the data we got initially, we were only able to load in this much of it. But anyway, the rest of this is just designed to be additional helpful information up in the KPI strip. Here we can see more specifics on why things are failing. Again, let's get even more zoomed in there. So we can see it broken up by the date here on this axis, and then by company into all these different ones. So we get to see who is giving us bad data, and then ask them very nicely, please give it to us in a better format so that we don't end up quarantining your data. We need to do better analysis for you guys. Help us out a little bit. Here we can see what the failure codes are. So invalid amount is a pretty common one. We are able to filter out things like negatives pretty easily, different formats like that. But a common issue is, I'll be able to show you a little bit later when I log in as an admin user. But a common issue is the formatting around how the Europeans will kind of switch the comma and the period, how they use those for numbers. That can cause some confusing outcomes. And again, here we have some where the company ID is null and then the data just gets loaded in. We're like, we don't know who had this transaction, so we can't really put it anywhere. And a similar thing with the timestamp. Again, here's just a more detailed log where you can kind of just go back and look at more of the specifics about them. The pipeline status, this just actually goes to the bottom of this page here, where it loads in a new dashboard, and it gives you a little bit more of the technical side of the pipeline. And so some of these charts like this, for example, you really just want all these numbers to be the same. That's why we have the green bars loaded proportionally. Because if they weren't the same, then that means some exchange rates are not being tracked, and that is not good for this Forex and conversion page especially. And again, this will just show the number of transactions over time. I believe it just shows the last week. It's just a few bars that are roughly the same size. Not that interesting, so I think we won't wait for it to load. I'll just sign out. Okay, you can see, the user. I'm a guest, and it would let me change the password, except that this is a demo user and it doesn't have a password. But if you wanted to do that as an actual user, not that one. You could log in, see if I remember the login. There we go. So I've already created an account, obviously, and anyone can create an account. It really just checks for a valid email format, because again, that wasn't really the main focus of this project. But anyone who creates an account then gets logged in as an admin. Any actions that change the database are tracked to the user, so at least I would know who is messing with my project if they want to log in and mess around. But here you can see we've added 2 views under the governance. So this is one thing that I mentioned I would show later with how to resolve quarantined data, right? So we had those 4,500 records that we needed to fix. And like I mentioned with the invalid amount, here are some amounts that couldn't automatically be resolved for one reason or another. The failure code doesn't get more specific than just the amount was no good. So now it's up to the user, whoever's in charge, to decide what to do with these records. There's probably a lot of ways you could try and figure that out. One pretty easy way is a lot of the um, companies have a designated currency that everything is done in. So like there's only one company where they operate out of the Brazilian currency. So you would know, okay, that's pretty likely just to be one client. So we can resolve all of these just as an example. And I'll do that for just some of these ones here. You know, you can I forget which one of the companies is in Durham, but let's say it was the Louvre one. There we go. We'll just assign that. Yeah, okay, it didn't work because this company does not operate in Durham. So it said, you actually can't do that because they have a rule where they don't do transactions that way. So, you know what? We'll just delete those records. Don't worry about them. And finally, if you wanted to add new clients, you would use this tool. It does work, but there's not really a good way to show it being added in the end. So I will skip that a little bit and just call that a wrap. Feel free to email with any questions. That is the email associated with the project. Yeah, thanks for watching.